And I'm very, very excited about this section of the conference because it's about community. There are fantastic speakers coming up, and I just wanted to share a couple of things about community before I introduce the speakers. Something that I often hear, and has been said in this very conference earlier, is that it's hard to find community if you leave religion, or sometimes I hear it as something that religion is so good at is community. And how do we find those shared values and that support system? For someone mentioned child rearing, if you're sick, if you're ill, or if you've suffered through something, religion sometimes gives you that template. So I was really curious, and I said, why don't I just look up the components of community and see if this sort of fits in a secular context. And just before I do that, a definition from a psychologist named, two psychologists, McMillan and Chavez, they define a sense of community as a feeling that members have of belonging, a feeling that members matter to one another and to the group, and a shared faith that members' needs will be met through their commitment to be together. These psychologists pose that community involves membership, of course, that involves like emotional safety with being in that group. It involves influence, not just you being influenced by the group, but you feeling that you can have an influence on other members of the group. There's a feeling of fulfillment of your needs and desires and your values. And also there's a shared emotional connection. So I think it's very, very possible for us to form and build communities. I'm very excited to hear the speakers today talk about this. So the first speaker today, who I'm very excited to introduce, is someone I met in 2013, who I still remember when it was for the very first Muslimish conference that I went to, and he offered us a ride to a restaurant after the conference. And when I went in his back seat, there was a book there. And when I looked at the title, it said Nonviolent Communication. And I said, wow, this is so interesting. And ever since that day, I've noticed this person embodying nonviolent communication every single time that he's had the opportunity to do so. If you've had a chance to hear his Boston talk, he talks about dialogue and what are some barriers to dialogue. So I'm very, very excited to introduce Wissam Charafeddine, who will be speaking today. Wissam, I'm just going to share a little bit from his bio. Wissam was born in the United Arab Emirates. And he was a community leader, and it still is in a few communities in Detroit. And to build a Muslimish community in Detroit has its unique aspects to it. And so Wissam is an unusual person, and I'm very excited to hear him talk a little bit about what his topic is, which is a universal declaration for a new world. So please help me welcome Wissam Charafeddine.
Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be with you here in New York. What a conference so far. So every time I come here, I always get inspired and get bombarded with these new ideas and passionate thoughts that I come out of the conference with almost a little bit of a change in some part of me or another. So today's talk is really, this is the first time I'm going to talk about this project. I've been working on it for several months now. And it really lies in the heart of the issue of building communities, the topic of building communities. I have a video. I think I'm going to have the time to show this video and finish my talk on topic.
Human rights is, geez, that's a good question.
Human rights. That's tough. Wow.
I don't even know how to give give a definition.
I would probably have to do a little bit of homework or something.
Any right that I think just as a normal, human, any...
The rights that humans have.
This is a very large debate.
To mindset.
Tú le puedes preguntar a 20 personas y te van a dar 20 diferentes opiniones.
Non saprei, no? È complicatissima.
We just take it for granted that they're there, but we don't even consider what they are.
Human rights are the rights you have simply because you're human. It's how you instinctively expect and deserve to be treated as a person, like the right to live freely, to speak your mind, and to be treated as an equal. There are many kinds of rights. Most apply to a certain group. But human rights are the only ones that apply to absolutely everyone, everywhere. That means kids, old people, poor people, basketball players, garbage men, rappers, teachers, Africans, Indians, Albanians, Christians, Muslims, Kabbalists, atheists, your mom, your dad, your next door neighbor, and you all have the exact same human rights. In other words, they're universal. But the question remains, what are they?
Name the human rights?
What the human rights are?
The right to live,
equality between all peoples.
Right to religion, the right to...
is there supposed to be a list somewhere I should be aware of?
According to the United Nations, there are a total of 30 human rights, which are usually lumped together and called simply human rights. They're all listed out in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the world's most widely accepted document on the subject. But it was a long time in coming. At first, there were no human rights. If you were in with the right crowd, you were safe. If you weren't, well, you weren't. But then a guy named Cyrus the Great decided to change all that. After conquering Babylon, he did something completely revolutionary. He announced that all slaves were free to go. He also said people had the freedom to choose their religion, no matter what crowd they were a part of. They documented his words on a clay tablet known as the Cyrus Cylinder. And just like that, human rights were born. The idea spread quickly to Greece, to India, and eventually to Rome. They noticed that people naturally followed certain laws, even if they weren't told to. They called this natural law, but it kept getting trampled on by those in power. Not until 1,000 years later in England did they finally get a king to agree that no one can overrule the rights of the people, not even a king. People's rights were finally recognized, and they were now safe from those in power. Kind of. It still took a bunch of British rebels declaring their independence before the king got the point that all men are created equal. Which isn't to say he liked the idea, but he couldn't stop them, and America was born. The French immediately followed with their own revolution for their own rights. Their list was even longer, and they insisted that these rights weren't just made up. They were natural. The Roman concept of natural law had become natural rights. Unfortunately, not everyone was so thrilled. In France, a general named Napoleon decided to overthrow the new French democracy and crown himself emperor of the world. He almost succeeded, but the countries of Europe joined forces and defeated him. Human rights was again a hot topic. They drew up international agreements, broadly granting many rights across Europe. But only across Europe. The rest of the world somehow still didn't qualify. Instead, they got invaded, conquered, and consumed by Europe's massive empires. But then a young lawyer from India decided enough was enough. His name was Mahatma Gandhi, and in the face of violence, he insisted that all people on Earth had rights, not just in Europe. Eventually, even Europeans started to agree. But it wasn't going to be that easy. 2 world wars erupted. Hitler exterminated half the Jewish population of Earth in horrifying Nazi death camps. And all told, 90 million people died. Never had human rights been so terrifyingly close to extinction. And never had the world been more desperate for change. So the countries of Earth banded together and formed the United Nations. Their basic purpose was to reaffirm faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person. But what were human rights? Were they the proclamations of Cyrus, the natural laws of Rome, the declarations of France? Everyone seemed to have a slightly different idea of what human rights should be. But under the supervision of Eleanor Roosevelt, they finally agreed on a set of rights that applied to absolutely everyone. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The French concept of natural rights had finally become human rights. So, in summary, at first, only a few lucky people had any rights, until one of those guys decided, hey, other people should have some rights too, which was great, except not everyone agreed. And it only took a few thousand years of fighting and declarations and more fighting until everyone finally agreed that human rights should apply to everyone. And they all lived happily ever after. Except for one little problem. If people have the right to food and shelter, why are 16,000 children dying of starvation every day? 1 every 5 seconds. If people have freedom of speech, why are thousands in prison for speaking their minds? If people have the right to education, why are over 1 billion adults unable to read? If slavery has truly been abolished, why are 27 million people still enslaved today? More than twice as many as in 1800. The fact is, when it was signed, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights did not have the force of law. So the question is, who will make those words a reality?
I'm gonna stop at this point. This year is the first year where Lebanese citizens outside Lebanon could vote in the Lebanese elections. I'm a dual citizen, I have US citizenship, I also have Lebanese citizenship. This is the first time in my lifetime. I was born a few years after the civil war started in Lebanon, and I have no recollection of any time in my life where Lebanon was a country outside war. And Lebanon is still in a state of war, more or less. And that was my first chance to vote for a party in Lebanon. So it's a sectarian country, as you know, and people vote according to their sectarian tendencies. Although there's new movements every once in a while. There was a strong movement this year for civic society, mostly secular movement, and they had a bunch of candidates. They don't have a party, but they had a bunch of candidates. They actually had 66 candidates, out of which none got elected. Although the whole country, 100% of the country knows that the country is corrupt, and is corrupt because of the existing status quo and because of the leadership. But when it comes times for voting, there's so much pressure and there's so much bias that it ends up with the same status quo. The point I wanted to make is before me deciding who to vote for, I wanted to see the statement of values of this movement. And they didn't have one. They didn't have one unified statement of values for these candidates. So each candidate was running independently, but they decided to run together in one la'iha, as a one caucus, but they didn't have one unified statement of value. So how can I be supportive of a group that doesn't have a statement of value? What if I'm not going to question and interview each one of you, you don't have content online? It's just a long process. I need to have a statement of value. Today's talk about the importance of this sort of document, the importance of documentation. This meeting today wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for a group of people who they decided to stand against the status quo. They wanted to stand against the status quo of prohibiting questioning within Muslim communities. They wanted to create a safe environment for people to exchange opinions without taboos, without being judged, without their security being, compromised. So they have done something. They went into action in doing something that changes the status quo. Now, the inspiring thing from history, that everything in history happened because of such a thing. Because of a group of people who declined, who stood against the status quo and did some sort of an action to change the conversation, to change the reality. And it's always a small group of people, and it's always a modest effort that grows very slowly. It is rarely something that happens all of a sudden. It is rarely something that happens without a struggle. It is rarely that you have enough funding and enough resources to accomplish your goal. This has all the characteristics of all the successful movement in history. Because all of the successful movement in history, they started at a dark place, at a difficult place. This is an inspiration to us, but it's only an inspiration if we read history in that way. If we know that it might not be in our lifetime, but it has to be done, not to belittle of any small effort done here or there, whether it is to promote science, to cultivate arts, to build communities, just like the title of this conference. Muslimish does not want to promote atheism. Muslimish does not promote Islam. Muslimish very simply promotes open dialogue for a pluralistic society. That seems a very simple need and want, but till today, we are sitting today while there are people that we know that we don't even know where they are because of their free opinion. If you go to our Facebook page today of Muslimish, you'll see our profile picture of Sharif Jaber, a young Egyptian in his 20s who has disappeared since a few weeks now, and his whereabouts are still not clear till today because of his blogging. Basically, he's blogging his opinion and his free thought. How do we read that history in a way that positions ourselves to be a part of a bigger wave of change? And I feel personally, and that's what I'm presenting today, is that having documentation, statements, is a very, very important way of achieving our goal. So if I am meeting with another organization and we agree on something, that agreement doesn't have a value unless we have something written. We are governed today by all these documentation around us. We are governed by these documents that were written by a few people here and there, and now we live by that. So never look down at such a document or an effort. Now, the document in your hand is just my interest in making this practical. So I just put together with a group of people a draft, just to make something that is a little bit dreamy, a little bit more real when it's in your hands. And to know that is not far-fetched. I know that it's going to take more than writing a document to make something like this recognized, but dreams and efforts like this are born with these very simple steps. Every one of these documents that influences many parts of our life today is designed by many of these documents. They were written by someone at a certain point. Either a person or a group of people, and they believed in them, and they were disbelieved by their society, and they were presenting something that was far-fetched, and some of them they thought people around them thought they're crazy, but they kept going at it, and the more buy-in people had with these sort of documentation, these sort of statements, the more power these statements gained, and the more power these statements exerted. These statements became a powerful tool in society. The Human Rights Declaration itself was worthless if it wasn't for the belief that has accumulated around it and made it a real document and a measure for human rights across the world. So, the USA Declaration of Independence, when it was written, it was also something that was not taken seriously. It had a lot of opposition from within the American revolutionaries. They thought that it's far-fetched to actually and be independent from Britain. You know, we understand that we're against taxation, but no, that's going too far. Really, you think we can have an independent state? But that actually took, you know, it took a little bit of effort and a little bit of testing, and it actually created the country and the privileges that we live in today. These are the writers of the Declaration of Independence. One of the most inspirational stories that have designed our modern world, this is a painting by Louis-Jacques David about the tennis court oath that has initiated the first kind of the beginning of the French Revolution. King Louis XVI has finally, out of a lot of pressure, allowed the delegations to meet, and then they became very loud in the parliament that hasn't met for 150 years, so he decided to shut down the parliament just like it was before. And when the representatives, the delegates of the people arrived, I mean, anyway, the votes were split into three. 1/3 was for the noblemen, 1/3 was for the clergy, and 1/3 was for the delegates. So at any case, the noblemen, the clergy, and the king were allies. So they had the majority at any case, but they weren't even interested in hearing that discussion. And he shut down the Versailles in front of these delegates, and they decided to stick there and meet in the tennis court next door. By the way, certainly it didn't happen in the tennis court, but it was represented as such. So they met in this close-by place, and they made an oath. They took an oath. They wrote it. They would not leave until they wrote this paper, an oath that they will continue to meet regardless of the permission of the king or not. This was the spark that started the French Revolution, and it has brought down 3 huge symbols that people didn't even fathom that these symbols will ever be gone. The king, the noble class, and the control of the church over France. When France was the most important and powerful country in the world at that, it was the superpower of the world. So that is a very, very symbolic effort. And of course, I know Mariam Namazi and Ali Rizvi speak about that, speak about the print press and how it has allowed and enabled the Enlightenment, and how the internet is doing the same thing for the secular movement today. And of course, with the printing press, think about it. It's about the printing press. It's about the printing press that allowed for all this change to happen. It's people being able to speak and speak and speak for years and years and years until people started accepting these truths and reality. So don't look down at any statement that you write, any opinion that you publish, any article that you write, every single word. If you're sitting in a gathering with your family, a statement that you make, just adding to the pool of thoughts. Don't underestimate all these. I have a lot of people that come back to me and tell me, I heard this once, you said this sentence and this sentence here and there. These are part of the cumulative wave that is taking place, and you play a part by these small things. They say in social engineering that the first comment determines 90% of the comments afterwards. So if someone makes a statement, someone makes a comment, the comments afterwards are influenced by that first comment. Although, if there's 30 people sitting, they might have totally different thoughts, but that first comment heard influences all the other comments that's going to come afterwards, or a large percentage of it. So, like we saw today, I guess. So every statement, every comment makes a very, very strong statement. So first of all, what is the importance of having a document? It's a clear statement of values. It's stating your values clearly. Here's what I stand for. Here's my value system. Upfront, non-negotiable principles. When you write your statement values, when you write your values, you're saying that these things I'm solid about. Although they're still negotiable. Everything is negotiable. I mean, we are here, because we have said that everything that is written is not divine and it is open to negotiation. But still, just by calling this group of values as your values, you're printing them, you're publishing them, and like the Yale famous research that research graduates, those who have written down their goals, so they had goals, those who have written them down, compared to those who have not written them down, they still have goals, but they just didn't write them down. These had like 97% more chance of achieving these goals than those who didn't write them down. So it's a study that was done over 30 years. So they studied the graduates when they graduated, they studied them 10 years after, and then 10 years after. So when you write it down, it brings more legitimacy to it, makes it more solid as a value for yourself. Also, the document is a potential basis for agreement. When people have different opinions about different things, you cannot be advocating critical thinking and expecting people to have a collective mind. We actually are suffering from the collective mind that is the totalitarian mind, that people have to all think the same thing, and that's something that has been advocated. كأنهم على قلب رجل واحد, or they're all on one heart. They're all on. They have exactly the same. That's something that only works in an army when they have to obey one order in order for an army to be successful. But when you talk about civic society, you cannot advocate for one mind. That actually is destructive to society. So if you're advocating for critical thinking and for people to have difference of opinion, then you cannot advocate for one mind for all these people, one opinion. So you have to have some sort of differences. But there are values that you agree with. And these values are the basis of agreement. So where do I agree, me and you? And let us work on what we agree on, not focus on what we disagree on. We know that we disagree on so many things. Let's work together on what we agree on. So this also, when you state your values, you are also creating commonality between you and others. You can be an ally in certain aspect with other people. Also, equalization of principles, that I care about these principles equally. Talking points of negotiation. So if I'm negotiating with another group having some sort of alliance, this is the basis of my negotiation. These values. How many of these values do you accept? Would you are willing to respect as our final reference for values? So if there is any, these agreements are always general. They don't go into so much details. You build on this general agreements, and then you go into details. It is time for us to build alliances, and we need this statement of value to build alliances with others. We get asked in conferences so many times. So what is Muslimish? Can you tell us what is Muslimish again? They want to hear a precise statement what Muslimish is. That's why we have it right on our front page. This is who we are. This is our mission statement. This is what we want. This is our goals. It's also so it's a guiding document for building alliances. It's the glue for a diverse secular society. Can you exit this? And so when you have a diverse group with people who care about different social issues, they have different social values, they have different definitions for terms that are controversial, like feminism or equal rights or gender equality or whatever terms that are still in the growth process. They're still being shaped and defined. Then you need that document that glues this group together. You need to focus on the commonality between this group. So okay, if this doesn't work, then we're fine, because I'm almost out of time, and I don't think I need to go over all these one by one, because the point is the idea behind this document. This document is still a draft and in the development. I invite every one of you to actually participate in the making of this document. So if you have any input, you're so much welcome to present that input to this document so we can create that document that can unify us together. So wherever we're working at, wherever we're working on, there is one thing that is getting stronger, is that statement of values. It's getting stronger because all of us are working, we're focused on different goals, we're focused on different aspects, but at the end of the day, everything is coming back to strengthen that collective movement that's represented by that documentation. And I want to bring to your attention that successful movements in history has had that. There is no example where this didn't take place. I can give you even from the Islamic movement, it's always surrounds this statement of value, that statement of, the Muslim Brotherhood. They had the Usul al-Ashrin by Imam Hassan al-Banna. They had the 20 principles by Imam Banna, which it's the basis of their work. And then they had Ma'alim fi al-Tariq, milestones by Sayyid Qutb, which became and it was, when I grew up in the United Arab Emirates, that book was not allowed in the United Arab Emirates, but it is one of the manuals, it is one of the bases, the constitution for modern Islamic world. It created terms, it clarified the translation of the Islamic work today in our time. So these documents are very important for success of movements, and we need to start thinking about such documents, such books. Is there a book that we can give as a manifesto of our thought? Maybe first, creating some agreed upon values will lead us at a certain point to have some sort of a manifesto of the new secular movement in the world. Of course, that has to be led by the intellectuals of the secular movement. I don't claim to be one of them, but I'm trying to stir on the subject, and I've been in touch with leaders in the movement about this subject. So many of these are common with the Declaration of Human Rights. Many are not. Many have to do with our modern time. For example, if I was living in Lebanon and I want to create a secular movement, then this is one of the principles that I need. I need to have a government based on meritocracy, not based on sectarianism, not based on what faith my parents are. I want to have people who are qualified for their positions. And I think what's happening in this country right now is an example of having an absence of meritocracy and governance in some cases. So are you qualified for that position? That should be. Very few countries, by the way, in the world have a meritocracy, within their governance. That's not a common thing. So we have a long way to go, and we need to push forward our civilization. I've talked about rules of order, the importance of them in running civil organizations. Separation between religion and state is not something that is international yet. Welfare, that's something that is in the human rights, and we need to bring it more. That has an influence on the minimum wage. It has been a great, really intellectual journey. Putting this together, going back and forth. I think the hardest one I dealt with was animal rights, because it's a very controversial, still an open ethical subject. There's so much differences about it. And by the way, about half of these are not applied today in the United States. So forget about the rest of the world. Even in our country, many of them have not been applied yet. That's why we have a large poverty rate, we have police brutality issues, etc. So I leave this document with you to be an inspiration, and I hope this invitation for the secular movement internationally to come together to create the statement of value that we can, we can move from. That can be a starting point for us to go from there on in building societies around these. We know that we cannot change people. We understand that this is personal journeys. People have long personal journeys. The only way of changing societies is through a long process of education. So it's a very long process. So what do you do till then? Do you keep on debating and trying to clash, groups clashing with each other, trying to convince each other of their opinions? Well, while that is happening at an intellectual level, we need to make sure it doesn't affect us on a practical, civil level. And to do that, we need to have that agreed upon values, that wherever our disagreement intellectually is, these values will preserve for each other. And this is the invitation that I hope that it will come to a fruition one day. At least I have that statement as a personal value system that my children will see as their father's personal value system. So this is the least accomplishment I've made through this document, but my aspiration is for it to be an inspiration for the secular movement to work on something that is more legit and international, and that will come into fruition by actually being an inspiration for societies to change, given from the most free societies like our societies to the most ones that are outside the civil war today by having complete absence of democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wissam, for opening our eyes a little bit to the written modality as a force for change. That's something, it's definitely a new way for me to think about things. And a lot of these human rights are interdependent. I mean, it's striking how you need security for education, for mobility. These are very fundamental human rights. So thank you again, Wissam. Okay.